Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Go Beyond. My name is Alyssa Robinson. I am the digital strategist here at Trietsch, and I am here with Reverend Daniel Humbert, our senior pastor. And Go Beyond is simply a time for us to come together and dig deeper into what we talked about at worship on Sunday. So, this past Sunday, we were talking about Psalms of Lament, and it doesn't sound like the most fun topic to cover, but I will say it is very inspiring and heartfelt and deeply rooted in our humanity. So today we're going to dig a little bit deeper into those Psalms of Lament. And so I will just go ahead and jump in to our very first question, because when I read the Psalms of Lament, I'm always curious of what are the circumstances happening behind each of these psalms. What is happening in the mind of the writer, and what are they experiencing? And can I throw myself into that emotion and relate to it in some way? So, what psalms do we know the circumstances behind why they were written specifically for the Psalms of Lament, and which ones do we not know? Can you hear me, Daniel? Uh-oh, we might have a technical glitch here. Can you hear me?
Sorry, did you lose me?
I thought I did for a moment. Can you hear me okay?
Man, I don't know what happened, y'all. Literally, my screen went blank all of a sudden, so I apologize.
Well, I'm hearing you now and we're live, so I'm going to repeat that question for you.
I heard it. I heard your question.
Oh, okay.
I just all of a sudden went blank. I apologize. I don't know what happened. So um, we don't know all the circumstances with regard to the laments, because here's the deal. There are over 60 Psalms of lament, and so it's difficult to know all circumstances. But there are two primary kinds of laments in the Psalms. One is individual laments written by individuals, and then the other is um, what are known as communal laments. And I want to speak into those a little bit because I didn't talk to the communal laments at all on the message on Sunday. So, in some of the circumstances in communal laments, and these are sort of Israel bemoaning its circumstances, right? So, versus David or Asaph speaking individually about their concerns. In the communal laments, it's the nation of Israel sort of lamenting, and somebody might be writing on their behalf, but it's the nation. And so a couple of instances, for instance, in Psalm 44, the communal lament is about the Assyrian king, invading the empire and invading the kingdom. And so that Psalm of Lament speaks into what is it like to be invaded? What is it like to have our territory taken from us? What is it like to have people come after us? And then another instance is Psalm 79, which is a Psalm of Lament as well, and that's more about the Babylonian exile, where the Israelites were sort of forced into exiting their country and exiting their faithfulness into the Babylonian exile. And so that too speaks about, golly, what is it like to have to leave our environment and leave our faithfulness and literally start into a different form of faithfulness. And so those are a little easier to understand. The individual laments, there's far too many for us to know all of the circumstances, but the communal laments are a little easier.
So you specifically on Sunday talked about Psalm 13, and it's short and it's sweet, and it's so gut wrenching to read because it's deeply relatable. Do we know the circumstances behind Psalm 13? Is it communal or individual?
Yeah, so it's an individual lament. It's written by David, King David. King David wrote almost all of the Psalms in the first book of Psalms. And so this one falls in that category. We actually don't know all of the circumstances that led to his writing this. What we know, however, as you've already pointed out, is Psalm 13, number one, is brief. Number two, it fits the formula for a lament so very well because it's only 6 verses. And then number three, it is sort of universal, right? It speaks into this whole sense of what does it feel like to be alone? What does it feel like to be abandoned? What does it feel like for me to feel as though God has given up on me? And, I don't know that there's any more universal experience than that. And so my hunch is that's just David speaking into some kind of circumstance where he felt that, where he felt as though God had abandoned him and left him. And, I think all of us in faith have felt that at some point.
Mhm. And so I just want to, if you don't mind, it's only 6 verses. I want to read it real quick so that
Sure.
our listeners can hear it again. So this is Psalm 13, and it starts with, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trust in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." And I think there is just so much of the human condition packed into 1 or 6 verses. That's like, "You've forgotten me. My enemies are higher than me. They're celebrating, and I'm feeling left out. I'm alone. I just want to die. My like, I'm not successful. I'm falling apart." Um, and something in there, like you said, there's something in there that we've all felt at one point or another. But you mentioned the formula that you brought up on Sunday. And so the formula, can you talk us through that one more time?
Yeah, and I chose Psalm 13 quite literally because it's the poster child, if you will, for lament psalms. Again, its brevity helps identify that, and then it just has the clearest demonstration of the 4 points of the formula. So the formula is simply, let me identify the problem. I feel abandoned. I feel like God left me alone. Let me plea for help. Let me ask for help. And that was, don't leave me alone. And will you actually speak back to me and return the sparkle to my eye, right? The plea for help. And then and that's the typical lament. But what's left in the formula is a commitment to trust. And David literally says that in verse 5, I will trust you, God. And then finally, it's a promise to praise God. Not only will I trust that God's going to help me in this problem, but I'm also going to praise God in advance for the belief that that trust will actually be lived into. And so that's the formula for laments. And the reality is, all of the laments live into that formula somehow, some way. Obviously, some are much more extensive with regard to the problem and the plea. And some, on the other hand, are much more extensive on the trust and the praise component of it. Not one exception, but the exception, if you will, are most of the communal laments, like I mentioned, that are about sort of Israel in general rather than an individual. The communal laments kind of stray from that formula a little bit, and only in this regard. They tend to repeat the system a little bit. Like they might identify the problem, have a plea, and then move to trust, and then step back into, golly, there's still a problem here, and I really don't know why, and will you please help? And then step back into the trust again. So they just kind of repeat it. But otherwise, it's really kind of still there.
Well, and I felt that way when I was reading through Psalm 22 as well, which is the famous psalm that starts with, my God, why have you forsaken me?" which Jesus quoted at his death. And it felt like it was, when I read it in the entirety, it kind of went back and forth. It felt like of, I'm so low, I'm so worn out, people are mocking me, but I trust you. But then it goes back to, the bulls are encircling me. They surround me. They're raving and roaring like a lion. But it feels like it goes, Lord, don't be far away. But then it comes back to, they're hurting me, but Lord, be close to me. And it felt like a little shift back and forth on that.
Yeah, it does. So the longer laments, even the individuals have a little bit of that simply because they are so long, but they still fit the formula. They might just repeat the formula. get a bit of a cycle going.
So one of the questions that I have, as I was growing up and learning about prayer and talking to God, one of the things almost that I was warned against or shamed for in my prayer life was, don't treat God like a vending machine. It's not just about asking God for what you want and then expecting to get that. And so these laments are just an outcry to God of, things aren't going right for me and I need help. And they're very personal, unless it's the communal one. They're very individualistic of like, help me with this thing. How are the laments different from what we call a vending machine prayer, which is pushing the button and expecting to get the response you want from God?
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that. That's been for many years my metaphor and analogy for the way many of us pray, myself included sometimes, but sort of castigating against that vending prayer concept. So here's what I believe. So it's the formula that makes them different. And so clearly there's a problem and there's a plea, and that would be the vending machine prayer, if you will, or a close assimilation to it. But when we add in the trust clause, if you will, and the praise opportunity, that's what makes it different. Is there's an acknowledgement and a belief that God is actually going to step in somehow, some way. But I would take it one step further and say that the acknowledgement of the problem and the plea itself is much more personal than just, hey God, will you take care of this? Will you make this happen? Will you get rid of this problem? The problem and the plea are much more about my internal struggle and my faithfulness and my faithlessness. And so to me, they're much deeper than a vending machine prayer. They're much more about the human need for connection with God and for a desire to know that God is with me and for me. And so I find the prayers of lament deeply personal, even the communal ones, in terms of speaking on behalf of a nation. It's personalized. It's about a specific event or a specific occurrence, and it's acknowledging how hard it is to live with that and a desire for God to do something about it. And so it's very emotional, and you sense that in some of those, like you mentioned Psalm 22. I mean, you feel it when you read it, that it's very personal, not just, hey God, get this, will you take care of this, will you make this happen? I find them very emotional.
And they're deeply vulnerable too, of just putting it all out on the table and coming to God with where you are, what you're feeling in the most raw state, as opposed to like, can you just fix this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that to me is the best part of the Psalms. And in many regards, while I enjoy the Psalms of praise and thanksgiving more just because they feel energetic and celebratory, the Psalms of lament are, you just feel it. You feel the rawness of it, and therefore you are drawn into it. And it's really pretty cool.
Well, that is about all we have today. So thank you for joining us for another episode of Go Beyond. We will be back again on Wednesday with more personal questions about Psalms of Lament and what they mean to each of us personally and our experiences. And remember that you can catch all previous episodes of Go Beyond at tmumc.org/go beyond. So we will see you on Wednesday.